Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the edge of the map meets the edge of reason. Tonight we slip into Alaska, a frozen land where even the daylight feels haunted and the aurora sways like restless spirits. Out here, the roads vanish, cabins rot under snow, and whispers crawl through the pines. These are real stories, drawn from the people who've lived here long enough to know what moves in the dark. Before we start, hit subscribe and tap the bell so the next time the cold calls, you're ready. The night's already settling in, and the first story waits like a shadow at the tree line. Step closer, but not too close. Story 1. Ships that never left my GPS died in the exact spot where my grandfather drowned 40 years ago. And that was when I saw the Russian ship that should not exist. I am a commercial fisherman, third generation. My family has worked Prince William Sound since the 1950s. I know these waters better than I know my own driveway. Every rock, every current, every place where the fish run thick. But there are spots in the Sound that fishermen avoid. Dead zones where equipment fails. Where compasses spin like roulette wheels. Where boats that enter sometimes do not come back the same. My grandfather disappeared in one of those zones in 1983. His boat was found drifting 3 days later. Empty, engine still running, coffee still warm in the thermos. But no sign of him. The Coast Guard called it an accident. Man overboard. Case closed. My father never believed it. He said my grandfather knew those waters too well to fall. Said something took him. I never believed the stories. Thought they were superstition. Old men trying to explain bad luck and equipment failure. But that changed last November when I took my boat through the northeastern quadrant of the Sound. The area my grandfather was last seen. It was just after dawn. Calm water, clear sky. I was running my normal route to check crab pots. My GPS showed me exactly where I was. Then the screen flickered. The coordinates scrambled. Within seconds, every piece of electronic equipment on my boat went dark. Radio, fish finder, GPS, even my phone, all dead. The compass started spinning, not drifting, spinning fast, like something was pulling the needle in circles. I killed the engine and drifted, trying to get my bearings. The water was still calm, but it felt wrong. Too still, like the ocean was holding its breath. That was when the fog rolled in. It came from nowhere, thick gray walls rising from the water itself. Within minutes, visibility dropped to 20 feet. I could not see the shore, could not see other boats. Just my deck and the wall of fog pressing in from all sides. And then I heard the creaking. Wood on wood, old wood, the sound of a sailing ship. Impossible. There were no sailing ships in Prince William Sound. Not for over 100 years. But the sound grew louder, closer, accompanied by the splash of oars cutting through water. A shape emerged from the fog. A ship, massive, three-masted, wooden hull dark with age and water damage. Sails hanging in tatters. It glided past my boat maybe 50 yards away. Silent except for that creaking. No engine, no crew visible on deck. Just the ghost of a vessel moving through water that should not support it. I grabbed my phone to take a picture. Still dead. I tried the radio. Nothing. The ship continued past me and vanished back into the fog. The creaking faded, and slowly, my equipment flickered back to life. GPS coordinates locked in. Radio crackled with static, then cleared. The compass stopped spinning and pointed north. The fog lifted as quickly as it had come. I was exactly where I thought I was. No other boats nearby. No sign of the ship I had just seen. I started the engine and got out of there fast. Did not check my crab pots. Did not look back, just opened the throttle and ran for port. I did not tell anyone what I saw. Knew how it would sound. But I started asking questions. Careful questions. Other fishermen. Old-timers who had worked these waters for decades. And I learned I was not alone. Dozens of people had seen ships in the fog. Old Russian ships from the colonial era. Some saw them up close. Some only heard them. But everyone who encountered them lost their electronics. Everyone felt that same wrongness in the air. The stories went back generations. Native fishermen had legends about ghost boats long before the Russians ever came. They said the Sound had thin places. Spots where the boundary between worlds was weak. Where past and present bled together. The Russians built settlements in some of those spots. And when their ships sank or their people died, they did not always leave. They just drifted, trapped in the fog, forever sailing waters they could never escape. I tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a derelict boat. But 3 weeks later, it happened again. Same area, same fog. This time I saw 2 ships. One was the same 3-masted vessel. The other was smaller, a sloop. And on the deck of the sloop, I saw figures. Men in old clothing. Russian naval uniforms from the 1800s. They were working the rigging, moving with purpose, but their movements were wrong. Too slow, too fluid, like they were underwater. One of them turned and looked directly at me. His face was pale, features blurred, like looking at someone through frosted glass. He raised a hand, not waving, beckoning, calling me to come closer. My engine died, just cut out completely. The boat drifted toward the sloop. I tried to restart. Nothing. I was being pulled, not by current, by something else. The water around my boat began to glow. Faint blue-green bioluminescence, and beneath the surface, I saw more shapes. Dozens of them, bodies suspended in the water, all facing up, all reaching toward my hull. I grabbed an oar and started paddling, fighting against the pull. The sloop was 20 feet away now, close enough to see details. The wood was rotted, covered in barnacles. The sails were shredded, and the crew was not alive, could not be alive. Their skin was too pale, their eyes too empty. But they moved, they worked the ship, and they were trying to bring me aboard. The engine caught, roared to life without me touching the key. I did not question it, just grabbed the wheel and turned hard. The boat lurched away from the sloop. The glowing water faded. The shapes beneath the surface sank back down into darkness. Within minutes, I was clear. The fog lifted. The ships vanished. But this time, something followed me home. I noticed it when I docked. A smell, salt and rot, old wood. It clung to my clothes, my boat, my skin. I showered 3 times but could not wash it off. And that night, I heard sounds outside my house. Creaking, wood on wood, the splash of oars. I looked out my window. My driveway was filled with fog, and in that fog, I saw the outline of a ship. Impossible. I was 5 miles from the water, but the ship was there, anchored in the fog like my driveway was ocean. The pale crew stood on deck, watching my house, waiting. I did not sleep, just sat with the lights on and a baseball bat in my lap. By morning, the fog was gone. The ship was gone, but the smell remained, and I knew they had marked me. Whatever those things were, they had decided I belonged with them, that I was part of their crew now. I talked to a local historian, showed him sketches I had made of the ships. He identified them immediately. Russian naval vessels from the late 1700s, part of an expedition that vanished in Prince William Sound in 1798. 23 men, 2 ships, gone without a trace. The Russians searched for months but never found wreckage or survivors. The official report said they likely sank in a storm, but local indigenous stories told a different version. They said the ships entered a forbidden area, a place where the water was cursed, where the boundary between life and death was thin. The ships did not sink. They crossed over, got trapped on the other side, and they had been trying to return ever since, reaching through the fog, pulling the living into their world one by one. The historian said fishermen had been disappearing in that area for over 200 years. Always in the same spot, always in the fog. Their boats were found empty, just like my grandfather, just like dozens of others. They had been taken aboard the ghost ships, added to the crew, forced to sail forever in the gray space between worlds. I sold my boat last month, quit fishing, moved inland. But it does not matter. The fog finds me. 2 nights ago, it filled my bedroom, and I heard the creaking, felt the ship rocking beneath me, saw the pale crew standing at the foot of my bed. The one who beckoned to me in the sound was there. He reached out his hand, and this time, I understood what he was offering. Not death, something worse, an eternity of sailing, of existing in that cold gray nothing. Never alive, never dead, just trapped. I am writing this because soon I will not be able to. Soon I will walk into the fog and board that ship, and I will join the crew that never stops sailing, never stops searching for a shore they will never reach. My grandfather is there. I have seen him in the fog, standing at the helm, pale and empty-eyed, waiting for me to join him. And I know now that I will, because once the ghost ships mark you, there's no escape. You can run from the water, you can move to the desert, but the fog will find you. And when it does, you will sail forever in Prince William Sound. Another ghost among ghosts. Another name added to the list of fishermen who went out one morning and never came home. Story 2. Sitka Symphony Hall incident. I found the photograph tucked inside a water-damaged journal at an estate sale in Anchorage last month. 39 people sitting frozen in a concert hall, their eyes completely white, mouths hanging open like they were screaming without sound. The timestamp read October 13th, 1985, 8:47 p.m. Sitka Symphony Hall. My grandfather, his handwriting on the back simply said, "They made me watch." I never knew my grandfather worked security at that hall. Mom never mentioned it. Nobody in our family ever talked about Sitka, despite him living there for 20 years. Now I understood why. The journal chronicled his final 2 weeks at the Symphony Hall before the incident everyone pretends never happened. His entries started normal enough. Complaints about late shifts. Notes about which musicians snuck cigarettes during intermission. Then came October 1st. He wrote about finding dead birds arranged in perfect circles outside the stage door. Dozens of them. No wounds, no explanation. Just dead, with their wings spread wide like they were still trying to fly. The maintenance crew cleaned them up, but they returned the next morning. This time, hundreds of birds, all different species, all with those same spread wings. My grandfather noted something else that made my skin crawl. Each bird, his eyes had turned white, like cataracts had formed instantly at the moment of death. By October 5th, the musicians started complaining about their instruments. Violins would play notes that didn't exist on any scale. Piano keys would depress on their own, creating harmonies that made people physically ill. The conductor, a stern German woman named Helena Weiss, insisted these were just acoustic anomalies. Old building, she said. Temperature changes affecting the wood and strings. My grandfather knew better. He started hearing things during his night rounds. Not music exactly, but something underneath it. A frequency that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He described it like the building was humming a tune it had learned over decades of performances, but gotten terribly wrong. Like a child trying to sing a song in a language they didn't understand. October 8th brought the first disappearance. A cellist named Marcus Chen simply vanished during rehearsal. One moment he was playing, the next his chair sat empty, his cello still vibrating with the last note. Nobody saw him leave. Security footage showed him there one frame, gone the next. No blur of movement, no exit, just presence, then absence. The police investigated for exactly 1 day before declaring it a voluntary disappearance. My grandfather wrote that 2 officers came to review the footage, watched it once, then left without taking notes. Their eyes had looked wrong somehow. Too focused, like they were seeing something beyond the screen. October 10th was when my grandfather first noticed the audience members. Not during performances, but after. Some would remain in their seats long past closing, staring at the empty stage. When approached, they snapped back to awareness, confused about the time, sometimes not remembering attending a concert at all. One elderly man insisted he'd been sitting there since 1962, waiting for his wife to finish her piano recital. His wife had been dead for 15 years. The journal entries became frantic after October 11th. My grandfather discovered that the Symphony Hall had been built on the site of an old Russian Orthodox church that burned down in 1867. 118 people died in that fire, trapped inside during evening mass. The weird part wasn't the fire. It was the reports from survivors outside. They claimed the people inside hadn't screamed. They stood at the windows, watching calmly as flames consumed them, their mouths moving in unison like they were singing. October 12th, the day before the incident, Helena Weiss gathered all staff for an announcement. They would perform a special piece the following evening, something she discovered in the hall as archives. Sheet music without a composer's name, written in notation nobody recognized but somehow everyone could read. She played a few bars on the piano. My grandfather wrote that it sounded beautiful and horrible simultaneously, like joy and grief had been forced to share the same notes. That night, my grandfather tried to quit. He packed his things, wrote his resignation, prepared to leave town. But when he reached his car, he found himself walking back inside. Not forced, not compelled, just suddenly certain that leaving was impossible. The building needed witnesses, he wrote. It had been practicing for so long. October 13th arrived with an aurora borealis that shouldn't have been visible that far south. Green light painted the sky while the town slept. My grandfather arrived for his shift to find the hall already full. Every seat occupied despite the concert not starting for 3 hours. The patrons sat perfectly still, not talking, not moving, just waiting. Some were people he recognized. Others wore clothes from different eras, different decades. The musicians took the stage at exactly 8:34 p.m. My grandfather noted they moved wrong, too fluid, like their joints had forgotten how to work properly. Helena Weiss raised her baton, and the music began. Not the mysterious piece she mentioned, but Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Except it wasn't The notes were right, but something underneath them was terribly wrong. At 8:47 p.m., it happened. Every person in the audience stopped being themselves. My grandfather watched from his position by the emergency exit as their eyes rolled back, showing only white, while their bodies remained perfectly seated. The musicians continued playing, though their eyes had gone white too. The music didn't stop. If anything, it became more precise, more perfect, like human error had been removed from the equation. For 13 minutes, my grandfather watched as the audience members stood and wandered the aisles with those blind white eyes. They moved in patterns, creating shapes when viewed from above, circles within circles, geometric designs that hurt to perceive. Some reached out to touch others, and when they did, both would freeze momentarily, their mouths opening in silent screams before continuing their wandering. He wanted to run, but couldn't. He moved. The photograph he took was meant to be evidence, but his hands shook so badly it came out blurred except for those horrible white eyes. 39 people in frame, but he swore there were more. Shadows of people who weren't quite there, standing between the seats, watching the watchers. At exactly 9 p.m., everyone returned to their seats. Eyes normal. Conversations resuming mid-sentence. The musicians finished the symphony to thunderous applause. Nobody remembered those 13 minutes except my grandfather and, according to his final entry, 3 others. A janitor who quit that night and moved to Florida. A stagehand who was found dead a week later, his body arranged in the same position as those birds. And Helena Weiss, who continued conducting for 3 more performances before disappearing entirely. The journal, its last entry, dated October 20th, was brief. My grandfather wrote that he'd been hearing the music everywhere. In running water, in car engines, in the spaces between words when people spoke. The building had taught the sound to spread, he claimed. It was looking for new venues, new audiences. He was leaving Alaska, heading somewhere without concert halls, without theaters, without any place for people to gather and listen. I found his death certificate attached to the journal, as back cover. October 21st, 1985. Cause of death, exposure. He was discovered in the Nevada desert, 200 miles from the nearest town. The coroner noted something unusual. His body was found seated upright, hands positioned like he was applauding. His eyes were white. I should have stopped investigating there, should have burned the journal and forgotten about it. But I made the mistake of looking up the Sitka Symphony Hall. It is still operational, still hosting concerts every week. The reviews are all 5 stars, all mentioning the acoustics, how the music seems to follow you home, how you can still hear it days later. Last week, I attended a performance. I told myself it was just to see the building, to understand what happened to my grandfather. The symphony played Beethoven this night. When they reached the crescendo, I checked my watch. 8:47 p.m. For 13 minutes, I lost myself. Not my memory, not my consciousness, but my actual self. I was everyone in that audience simultaneously. Every person who ever sat in those seats. Every musician who ever played that stage. Every soul from that burned church still singing their eternal mass. We were one voice, one horrible, perfect voice, performing for something that had been listening since before humans learned to make music. When I came back to myself, my hands were applauding. I couldn't stop them. Nobody could stop. We clapped until our palms bled, until the musicians took their third bow, until Helena Weiss walked onto stage despite having vanished 39 years ago. She looked exactly the same. She looked at me, specifically at me, and smiled. I left Alaska that night, drove straight through to Oregon, then California, then kept going until I reached the desert. But it didn't matter. The music followed. It is playing now, as I record this, in the wind, in my heartbeat, in the static between radio stations. I understand now what my grandfather knew. The hall ice and he hunted. It's practicing. Every performance is a rehearsal for something larger. Every audience is being prepared, taught their parts in a symphony that began before humans existed and will continue long after we're gone. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself humming along. The melody is beautiful. It's the harmony underneath that should terrify you. Because once you hear it, really hear it, you realize you've always been part of the orchestra. We all have. The 1985 Sitka Symphony Hall incident wasn't an isolated event. It was just the first time someone noticed. Listen carefully to the music around you tonight. Count the beats between the notes. If you hear that 13th minute approaching, dawn, to fight it. It's easier if you just let yourself disappear. Trust me, I'm already gone. Story 3. Floating graves of Chena Hot Springs. I never should have taken that maintenance job at Chena Hot Springs Resort last winter. The moment I arrived and saw those ancient burial mounds rising through the steam like islands in a ghostly sea, something deep in my gut told me to turn around and drive the 60 miles back to Fairbanks. But the money was too good, and I needed it bad after my divorce cleaned me out. The resort manager, a weathered woman named Carol, mentioned the graves casually during my orientation, like she was pointing out the fire exits. They sat about 300 yards from the main lodge, perfectly preserved Athabascan burial mounds that had been there for over 4 centuries. The hot springs' steam perpetually shrouded them in mist, creating this otherworldly effect where they seemed to float above the frozen Alaska ground. My first week went fine. I fixed frozen pipes, maintained the generators, and kept the heating systems running for the handful of winter guests. But I couldn't stop staring at those mounds whenever I passed them. The way the steam moved around them was wrong somehow, swirling in patterns that defied the wind direction. And the temperature dropped near them, which made no sense given the geothermal activity. It was my 9th night when I first noticed the depressions. Fresh ones, human-sized, in the snow around the graves. Not footprints exactly, more like something had been lying there, pressing down into the powder. I reported it to Carol, thinking maybe some drunk guests had been messing around. She went pale and told me to stay away from the mounds after dark. That same night, the northern lights were going crazy, green and purple ribbons writhing across the sky like living things. I was checking the outdoor hot tub pumps around midnight when I saw movement near the graves. Through the steam, I could make out a figure standing perfectly still beside the largest mound. Too tall to be normal, maybe 7 feet, just standing there facing my direction. I called out, thinking it was a guest, but the figure didn't respond. Then it took a step backward and disappeared into the mound itself, like walking through a door that wasn't there. My flashlight beam hit nothing but disturbed snow and swirling steam. I convinced myself I was seeing things, that the isolation and the weird light were playing tricks on me. The next morning, I found Carol in the office earlier than usual, poring over old documents. She showed me a report from 1978 when archaeologists had excavated one of the mounds. They found elaborate burial goods, clothes, weapons, everything perfectly preserved by the unique mineral composition of the soil. Everything except bodies. Not a single remained in any of the 12 graves they examined. The graves had never been robbed or disturbed. The bodies were simply gone. Carol pulled out older papers, handwritten accounts from Russian fur traders in the 1800s. They described local Athabascan warnings about the hot springs, about how the earth here was too warm, too alive. The indigenous people buried their dead here specifically because they believed the boundary between worlds was thinner. They called them the floating graves because the dead didn't stay still. They walked between worlds. I laughed it off, told Carol she was spooking herself with old stories. But that night, I started keeping a closer watch. Around 2 in the morning, I saw them clearly for the first time. 3 figures emerging from the mounds, not climbing out but materializing from within the earth itself. They moved wrong, like their joints bent in extra places, gliding across the snow without leaving marks. They headed toward the resort, and I followed at a distance, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. They stopped at the guest cabins, standing outside the windows, pressing their faces against the glass. Their faces were human but stretched, like someone had pulled the skin too tight. Their eyes were black holes that seemed to drink in light. One turned and looked directly at me. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of teeth that went back into its throat like a tunnel. Then it smiled and beckoned me closer with a finger that had too many joints. I ran back to the maintenance shed and locked myself in until dawn. The next day, 2 guests complained about nightmares, vivid dreams of tall figures standing over their beds, trying to pull something out of their chests. One woman said she woke up with long, dark hairs on her pillow that weren't hers. The hairs were coarse and ancient-looking, like they'd been preserved for centuries. I tried to quit, but Carol begged me to stay until the end of the month when my replacement would arrive. She offered double pay and promised to put me in the staff quarters furthest from the graves. Against every instinct, I agreed. The money would set me up for months. But the encounters escalated. I started seeing them during the day, just glimpses in the steam. They began appearing in reflections, standing behind me in windows and mirrors. Once, I saw one inside the lodge, moving through the hallway like it was searching for something. When I blinked, it vanished, but the air where it had been smelled like centuries-old earth and sulfur. Then came the night everything went wrong. A massive aurora storm lit up the sky, and the electromagnetic interference knocked out our power. As I worked to get the backup generators running, I heard screaming from the guest cabins. Multiple voices, pure terror. By the time I got there, the screaming had stopped. The doors were open, swinging in the wind. Inside each cabin, the guests were still in their beds, but something was different. They were breathing, but their eyes had gone completely black, and when they opened their mouths, that same tunnel of teeth greeted me. They spoke in unison, in a language that sounded like grinding stones and whispered earth. One phrase in English broke through clearly. They said the boundary was opening wider, that the floating graves were never meant to hold the dead but to be doorways. I ran for my truck, but it wouldn't start. None of the vehicles would. The electromagnetic storm had fried everything electronic. I was trapped 40 miles from the nearest help with those things multiplying, pulling more of themselves through from wherever they existed. I barricaded myself in the maintenance shed with a ham radio that barely worked. For 3 days, I tried to reach anyone while those things circled the building, tapping on the walls with their wrongly jointed fingers. Sometimes they spoke to me in voices they'd stolen from the guests, pleading to be let in, saying they were cold and scared. Other times, they told me what they really were. They were the original inhabitants, the first people who discovered the hot springs thousands of years before the Athabascans. They found that the heat and minerals created a soft spot in reality, a place where they could slip between dimensions. They lived between worlds, neither fully here nor there, feeding on the life force of those who came too close. The Athabascans learned to appease them with burials, giving them empty graves as anchors to this world, keeping them somewhat contained. But the resort had disturbed the balance. Too many living people, too much electromagnetic activity from our modern equipment. The boundary was weakening, and more of them were pushing through. They wanted to trade places, to pull the living into their between space while they took our spots in this reality. On the 4th night, the aurora storm finally broke. My truck started, and I drove out of there doing 90 on icy roads, not caring if I crashed. Behind me in the mirrors, I saw dozens of those tall figures standing in the road, watching me leave. But here, it's the thing that still keeps me awake. In the reflection, I saw myself standing among them, watching my own truck disappear into the distance. When I reached Fairbanks and called the resort, Carol answered like nothing had happened. She said I'd never shown up for the job, that they hired someone else. The guests I'd seen transformed were fine, posting cheerful photos on social media from their Alaska vacation. But in every photo from the resort, you can see them in the background. Those tall figures in the steam, waiting. I know what really happened during those 4 days. I know because sometimes, when I look in the mirror too long, my reflection moves on its own. Sometimes I feel myself slipping, like I'm not fully here anymore. Those things at Chena Hot Springs didn't just want to trade places. They wanted to spread, to create more soft spots in reality. And I think they succeeded, because every night now, no matter where I am, I dream of those floating graves. I dream of standing inside one, looking up through the earth at a world I can almost touch. And every morning, I wake up with ancient, coarse hair on my pillow that I ascend to mine, and my hands have dirt under the nails from soil they never touched. The floating graves of Chena Hot Springs, Aaron, they're just doorways. They re-spreading. And if they listen to my story this long, if they pictured those graves in your mind, then they created a connection too. Check your dreams tonight. Check your reflection. Because once you know about the places where reality is soft, those who walk between worlds can find you anywhere. They were probably already watching. Story 4. Ghost Pipeline of Prudhoe Bay. I need to tell you something before I lose my nerve. Before the nightmares convinced me I imagined it all, there's a pipeline in Alaska that doesn't exist on any map. I know because I touched it. I heard what comes through it. And now, 8 months later, I still hear those voices every time I close my eyes. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a pipeline inspector for one of the major oil companies operating on the North Slope. 42 years old, divorced, no kids. The kind of guy who took a job in one of the most isolated places on Earth because there was nothing tying me anywhere else. I'd been working Prudhoe Bay for 6 years when it happened. 6 years of brutal cold, endless darkness in winter, and the kind of loneliness that makes you question whether you're still part of the human race. October 14th. The date is burned into my memory like a brand. I was scheduled for a routine inspection along the western perimeter, checking for pressure anomalies and corrosion. The fog had rolled in thick that morning, the kind that turns the tundra into a gray void where the ground and sky become one seamless nothing. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. My supervisor almost scrubbed the inspection, but the readings had been weird for 3 days straight. Fluctuations that made no sense. Pressure spikes in sections that should have been stable. I drove out alone in my truck, following GPS coordinates I'd traveled 100 times before. The fog swallowed everything. Even the sound of my engine seemed muffled, absorbed by that thick Alaskan air. When I reached the checkpoint, I parked and pulled on my gear. Thermal suit, helmet, toolkit, standard procedure. The cold bit through everything within seconds. Negative 15 degrees, but with the wind chill, it felt like 30 below. I started my walkthrough, following the pipeline east. My boots crunched through the frost. The world was silent except for that sound and my own breathing inside my helmet. That is when I first noticed something was wrong. The pipeline I was inspecting, the one I checked dozens of times, looked different. The paint was faded in spots that had been fresh last month. Some of the inspection ports had rust I'd never seen before. Small details, easy to dismiss. Then the fog shifted. For just a moment, maybe 5 seconds, it parted like a curtain. And I saw it. Parallel to the pipeline I was inspecting, maybe 40 yards to the north, there was another pipeline. Same diameter, same basic construction, but older. Much older. The metal was weathered and dark, covered in a patina that suggested decades of exposure. But that was impossible. I knew this route. I memorized every inch of it. There was no secondary pipeline here. The nearest parallel line was 3 miles south. I stopped walking. My heart rate kicked up. That primal response when your brain registers something fundamentally wrong. The fog rolled back in, thick as cotton, and the second pipeline disappeared. I stood there, breathing hard, telling myself I'd seen a rock formation. A trick of the light. Fog does strange things to perception in the Arctic. Creates mirages, makes you see things that aren't there. But I couldn't shake the image. That dark metal, the way it had seemed to absorb the fog rather than be obscured by it. I pulled out my radio. Base, this is Webb. I am at checkpoint 7. Can you confirm there's no secondary pipeline structure at this location? Over. Static crackled. Then my supervisor, his voice, distant and distorted. Negative. Webb, you wrote on a single line road. Why? Over. Just checking. Visibility was terrible out here. Thought I saw something. Over. Fog plays tricks. You know that. Complete your inspection and get back. Over. I should have listened. Should have finished my checklist and driven back to base. Instead, I walked north, toward where I'd seen the phantom pipeline. The fog was so thick I had to count my steps to track distance. 20 yards. 30. At 40. I stopped. My thermal scanner was picking up something. A heat signature. Faint but distinct. Metal. Warmer than the surrounding air by maybe 3 degrees. That shouldn't exist. Pipelines lose heat to the environment out here. They degenerated. The fog shifted again. And there it was. The pipeline materialized in front of me like something rising from deep water. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. The metal was pitted and scarred. There were rivets instead of modern welding seams. Construction techniques from the 70s, maybe earlier. Maintenance hatches with locks I didn't recognize. And something else, something that made my skin crawl. There was condensation on the outside of the pipe, tiny droplets of moisture, frozen into crystalline patterns. But the air was too cold and too dry for condensation. Nothing should have been producing that much humidity. I reached out and touched it. The metal was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than anything else out here. I could feel a vibration through my glove. A steady thrumming, like something was moving through the pipeline. Flowing. But when I pressed my ear against the metal, the sound I heard made no sense. It was mechanical, rhythmic, but underneath that, there were voices. Faint, distorted, like a radio signal bleeding through from another frequency. I couldn't make out words at first, just the cadence of speech. Multiple voices overlapping. Then, as I listened harder, I realized something that froze me solid. The voices were speaking backwards, phonetically reversed, like someone had taken a recording and played it in reverse. But these weren't recordings. They had inflection, emotion. They were conversing. I jerked back from the pipeline, my breath coming fast. This wasn't possible. None of it was possible. I pulled out my camera and took photos. Dozens of them. Documentation. Evidence. The camera flash lit up the fog in brief, sterile bursts. Each photo showed the pipeline clearly. Solid. Real. Undeniable. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine. Someone else. Walking through the fog from the east. Slow, deliberate steps. The crunch of boots on frozen ground. I spun toward the sound, my flashlight cutting through the gray. Hello? Is someone there? No response, but the footsteps continued, getting closer. I could hear breathing now. Heavy, labored, like whoever it was had been walking for a long time. The fog swirled, and for just a moment, I saw a silhouette. A person, tall and thin, standing maybe 20 feet away. They weren't moving anymore, just standing there, facing me. Identify yourself, I called out. My voice sounded weak in the vastness. The figure tilted its head, slowly, too slowly. The movement was wrong, mechanical, like someone had forgotten how human necks work. Then it spoke, one word, drawn out and distorted. My name, Marcus, but the voice came from behind me. I whirled around. Nothing, just fog. When I turned back, the figure was gone. The footsteps had stopped. The silence was absolute, heavier than before. I stood there, flashlight shaking in my hand, trying to process what I just experienced. Hallucination? Had to be. Hypoxia. Carbon monoxide leaked from my truck. Something rational. Then the pipeline started making a different sound. The thrumming grew louder, more urgent. The voices inside increased in volume. Still reversed, still incomprehensible. But now there was an edge to them. Panic, fear, like whatever was flowing through that pipeline was trying to warn me. Or trap me. I couldn't tell which. I ran. 42 years old, and I ran like a terrified child, compass in hand, following the heading back to my truck. The fog seemed to resist me, thickening around my legs, making every step harder. I could hear the pipeline behind me, that mechanical heartbeat growing louder even as I put distance between us. The voices rose to a crescendo, a chorus of backward speech that sounded almost like screaming. I reached my truck and locked myself inside, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it in gear and drove, following my GPS back to base, not caring about protocol or safety checks. I just needed to get away from that thing. When I reached the main facility, I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, trying to calm down, trying to think. The rational part of my brain was already working on explanations. Stress, isolation, the darkness and cold of an Arctic October playing tricks on an overworked mind. I heard stories of hallucinations out here. Guys who saw things that weren't there. The brain does strange things when it's starved for stimulation and human contact. I filed my report, described the pressure anomalies, marked the route as clear. I didn't mention the phantom pipeline. Didn't mention the voices or the figure in the fog. What would I say? I saw something impossible and ran away? I'd be on the next flight to Anchorage for a psych evaluation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices. That backward speech, rising and falling like a tide. I pulled up the photos on my camera, needing to see proof that I imagined it. But the photos showed exactly what I'd seen. A pipeline that shouldn't exist. Clear, solid, real. I zoomed in on one image and noticed something I missed in the fog. There were markings on the pipe. Faded stenciling. A series of numbers and letters that looked like identification codes. But the format was wrong. Not any system I recognized. I spent the next week researching old construction records, abandoned projects. Prudhoe Bay has a history of failed infrastructure, experimental techniques that didn't pan out. Maybe this was a forgotten test line, left to rust when the company moved to modern methods. But I couldn't find anything. No records, no blueprints, no paper trail of any kind. It was like the pipeline had never officially existed. Other workers started mentioning strange things. Rodriguez, one of the senior engineers, told me he'd been hearing weird sounds on the northern roads. Mechanical noises in places where no equipment should be running. Chen, a surveyor, said his GPS had glitched in the same area where I'd seen the phantom pipeline. His coordinates had jumped around, showing him in locations that didn't match his actual position. He'd written it off as interference from the aurora borealis. But the aurora hadn't been active that week. I tried to let it go, told myself it didn't matter. As long as the main pipelines were functioning and the oil was flowing, what did it matter if there was some unexplained anomaly out in the fog? The Arctic is full of mysteries. Things that don't make sense. You learn to accept that and focus on the work. But the voices followed me. At night, in my quarters, I hear them in the ventilation system. That backward speech, faint and distorted, like it was traveling through the metal itself. I started sleeping with earplugs, stopped using headphones, anything to avoid that sound. But it didn't help. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were in my head now, embedded in my memory like a virus. 3 weeks after my first encounter, I went back. I told myself it was professional curiosity, due diligence. If there was an undocumented pipeline out there, it was my job to report it properly, to figure out what it was and whether it posed any risk. But that was a lie. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. I needed to know if it was real. I needed to prove to myself that I hadn't lost my mind. I went alone again. Same route, same fog. It was like the weather was waiting for me, rolling in thick and gray the moment I drove out. This time I came prepared. Better camera, audio recorder, thermal imaging equipment. I was going to document everything. The phantom pipeline was there when I arrived. No waiting for the fog to part. It was just there, solid and dark, running parallel to the main line exactly where I remembered. I set up my equipment and started recording. Temperature readings, electromagnetic scans, acoustic measurements. The data was consistent. The pipeline existed. It was warm. It was vibrating. And those voices were still inside it, speaking in reverse. I spent 2 hours documenting everything, taking measurements every few feet along the line. The pipeline extended in both directions farther than I could see, disappearing into the fog. At one point, I found an access hatch. The lock was old, frozen solid, but I managed to crack it open with a pry bar. Inside was a valve system, manual controls, covered in ice and corrosion. And on the interior wall, someone had scratched a message. 5 words, barely legible. Don, let them come through. My blood went cold. Someone else had been here. Someone had opened this hatch and left a warning. But who? And when? The scratches looked old. Decades, maybe, but that raised more questions than it answered. If this pipeline had been here for decades, why wasn't it documented? Why had nobody else reported it? I closed the hatch and stepped back. That's when I noticed the footprints, fresh ones, in the frost around the pipeline, leading away to the north. Human prints, work boots, my size. I looked down at my own feet, then back at the prints. They matched, exactly, but I hadn't walked in that direction, hadn't left the immediate area of the pipeline. Then I understood. They weren't my footprints. They were prints I was going to make. Future steps. The thought was insane, but I couldn't shake it. Time felt wrong here, fluid, like past and future were bleeding together around this pipeline the same way those voices bled through the metal. I followed the footprints. They led me north, away from the pipeline, out into the empty tundra. After 100 yards, they stopped. Just ended, mid-stride, like whoever had been walking had simply vanished. I stood at the last print, looking around, trying to understand. The fog was thicker here, so thick I couldn't see my own truck anymore. Couldn't see the pipeline. Couldn't see anything but gray. That is when the voices became clear. They were still reversed, still backwards, but I could understand them now. My brain had somehow learned to translate the reversed phonetics in real time. And what I heard made my stomach drop. They were coordinates, GPS locations, being read out in a continuous loop. Different voices, dozens of them, each reading a different set of coordinates. And mixed in with the coordinates were names, call signs, Delta 7 reporting, Echo 3 confirming, Alpha 9 requesting backup. It was radio traffic, communication between workers, but reversed. And based on the terminology, the call signs, this traffic was old. 70s or early 80s. Then one voice cut through the others. Clearer, more urgent. Pipeline rupture at Zone 4. Evacuate immediately. I repeat, evacuate Zone 4. Silence followed, brief and total, then screaming. Dozens of voices, all screaming at once. Their panic transcribed and reversed and trapped in this phantom pipeline for 40 years. I ran again, back toward where my truck should be. But the fog had changed. It wasn't natural anymore. It was alive, purposeful, herding me in a specific direction. I could feel it pushing against my back, guiding my steps. I emerged from the gray and found myself standing next to the phantom pipeline again. But I was in a different location. The main pipeline, the real one I'd been inspecting, was nowhere in sight. I'd been turned around completely. The pipeline, its vibration had changed. It was stronger now, more violent. The metal was heating up, the condensation boiling off in small clouds of steam. The voices inside weren't just speaking anymore. They were pounding, like something physical was trying to break through from the inside. Fists against metal, bodies throwing themselves against a barrier. I grabbed my radio. Base, this is Webb. Emergency. I need immediate extraction. My coordinates are, I looked at my GPS. The screen showed nothing but static. Random numbers that shifted and changed every second. I was nowhere, or everywhere. The device couldn't decide. Base, do you copy? I need help. There's something wrong out here. Only static answered. Then, slowly, a voice emerged from the white noise. My supervisor, his voice. But wrong, stretched out and hollow. Webb, you. Not scheduled for inspection today. Please confirm your location. What? I am at checkpoint 7. You approved this inspection this morning. Negative. Webb. Today is October 14th. You rescheduled to begin inspection at 0800. It is currently 0730. You were not on site yet. I looked at my watch. He was right. 7:30 a.m. But that was impossible. I'd been out here for hours. It was past noon. The light, the time, everything told me it was midday. But my watch disagreed. Base, there, as a second pipeline here. Undocumented. I stopped. What had I been doing? The memories were slippery, fragmenting. Had I been here for hours or minutes? Was this my first trip out or my second? The voices in the pipeline were in my head now, mixing with my thoughts, making it hard to separate what was real from what was echo. Webb, you were not making sense. Return to base immediately for evaluation. The radio went dead. I looked back at the phantom pipeline. The metal was glowing now, faint but visible, a deep red, like it was heating from the inside. The voices had stopped, replaced by a single sound. A countdown, numbers being spoken in reverse. 10, 9, 8. I understood with horrible clarity. This wasn't a pipeline. Not anymore. It was a recording, a loop, playing back the final moments of something terrible that had happened decades ago. A rupture, an explosion, death. The voices I'd been hearing weren't trying to warn me or trap me. They were just echoes, ghosts preserved in metal and time, waiting for the right conditions to play back. 7, 6, 5. I ran. For the third time, I ran. But this time I knew I wouldn't make it. The fog was too thick. The tundra was infinite. I could run forever and never reach my truck because I was running in place. Running through time, through a moment that had already happened and would keep happening forever. 4, 3, 2. The explosion was silent. No sound, no fire, just a wave of pressure that knocked me flat. And in that moment, lying in the frost, I saw everything. The phantom pipeline split open. Not physically, dimensionally, a tear in the fabric of the place. And through that tear, I saw them. The workers, dozens of them, trapped in the moment of their deaths, walking through fog that never cleared, checking pipelines that had already killed them, speaking in reverse because they were moving backwards through time, trying to reach the moment before the rupture, trying to warn themselves, trying to change what had already happened. I was one of them now. I understood that. Somewhere, in the real world, at 7:30 a.m. on October 14th, Marcus Webb was driving out to Checkpoint 7 for a routine inspection. And in this place, in this loop, I was already dead. Already trapped, already a voice in the pipeline, speaking backwards, trying to warn myself not to come. The fog cleared. I was standing next to my truck. The real pipeline, the documented one, stretched out in front of me. My GPS showed the correct coordinates. My watch showed 7:45 a.m. I lost 15 minutes. That was all. 15 minutes I couldn't account for. I completed my inspection on autopilot, filed my report, returned to base. Nobody asked questions. Nobody noticed anything wrong. But I knew. I carried the knowledge like a weight in my chest. I'd seen the other side. I did touch the boundary between what was and what continues to echo. I requested a transfer 3 days later. They granted it without argument. Too many workers burn out on the North Slope. The isolation breaks people. I was just another casualty. I left Alaska in November. Haven, to been back. Haven, to wanted to go back. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the voices. Faint and distant, coming from the walls of my apartment in Houston. In the pipes, in the wiring, backwards speech that I've learned to understand. And sometimes I hear my own voice mixed in with the others. Reading coordinates, reporting anomalies, warning someone who can to hear me about a pipeline that doesn't to exist except when the fog rolls in. The phantom pipeline of Prudhoe Bay is real. I have the photos, the recordings, the data, but none of it proves anything because the moment you try to show someone, the files corrupt. The images blur, the numbers change. The pipeline protects itself, protects its ghosts. If you work the North Slope, if you find yourself in fog so thick you can see your hands, if you hear mechanical sounds where no machines should be, don't to investigate. Don't to follow the sound. Don't to touch the warm metal. Just turn around and walk away. Because the pipeline doesn't just record voices. It collects them. And once it has yours, you will spend eternity trying to warn yourself about the moment you were already living. Speaking backwards through time to someone who won to understand until it is far too late. I still hear myself out there. Every night, reading coordinates I'll never reach. Trying to save someone who is already gone. Still brave enough to keep going? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. It keeps the fire burning while we're deep in Alaska's dark. Drop a comment about where you're listening from. Sometimes the whispers follow. Story 5. Voices beneath the microphone is still recording them right now, sitting in my basement, and I cannot bring myself to destroy it. My name is David Marsh, and 6 months ago I was just another construction foreman working a housing development project outside Fairbanks, Alaska. I had a crew of 8 men, a tight schedule, and absolutely no reason to believe that the ground beneath our feet was anything more than frozen dirt and rock. But on July 19th, when we broke through the permafrost on Lot 47, we discovered that some things are buried for a reason. The first voice came through at 3 in the afternoon. We were digging foundations for a new subdivision. Nothing unusual about the work. Fairbanks sits on permafrost, which means you need special equipment to break through the frozen layer before you could pour concrete. My crew had done this 100 times. Drill through the ice, clear the debris, move to the next site. Simple, routine. Except that day, when Tommy Vickers powered up the hydraulic drill and punched through the permafrost barrier, we all heard something that made us stop. It sounded like someone speaking, muffled and distant, but definitely a human voice. Tommy killed the drill immediately, and we all stood there in silence, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the wind and the distant hum of equipment from other work sites. Then we heard it again, clearer this time, multiple voices, talking over each other in a language I did not recognize. They were coming from the hole. I thought maybe we had broken through into a basement or old structure. Sometimes you find remnants of previous buildings buried under the frozen ground. But this site had been surveyed. There was nothing underneath us except permafrost that had been frozen solid for thousands of years. Yet the voices continued, rising up from the darkness like smoke. We called down into the hole. No response. The voices just kept going, having what sounded like casual conversations, completely unaware or uncaring that we could hear them. Marcus Chen, my equipment operator, pulled out his phone and started recording. That was the first mistake. The audio was crystal clear. You could hear everything. The inflections, the rhythm of speech, the occasional sound that might have been laughter, but none of us could understand a single word. It was not Russian, not any indigenous language we knew, not anything that sounded remotely familiar. Just this strange, fluid speech that seemed to twist and fold in on itself. I made the call to stop work and reported to our site supervisor. He drove out within an hour, listened to the recording, and immediately contacted the project manager. By evening, we had geologists and archaeologists examining the site. By the next morning, we had linguists and audio specialists setting up equipment. And by the end of that week, we had something that nobody could explain. The voices never stopped. 24 hours a day, they continued their conversations, emerging from the permafrost like radio signals from another world. The specialists set up microphones and recording equipment, capturing hundreds of hours of audio. They brought in experts on dead languages, on ancient dialects, on linguistic patterns. Nobody could identify what was being spoken. It did not match any known language, living or extinct. But here's what made it truly terrifying. The voices were responding to us. One of the linguists, Dr. Sarah Brennan, noticed it first. She had been playing back recordings at different speeds, trying to find patterns, when she realized that certain phrases seemed to be reactions to things we had said above ground. Not immediate responses, delayed by exactly 7 minutes. She would ask a question into the hole at noon, and at 7 minutes past noon, one of the voices would change its pattern, incorporating sounds that phonetically resembled her question. We tested it. I spoke my name clearly into the microphone. 7 minutes later, one of the voices produced a sound that was eerily similar. Dove Marsh. Not perfect, not exact, but close enough to make my skin crawl. Whatever was down there was listening, learning, mimicking. The project was suspended indefinitely. Our construction company was paid to keep the site secure while researchers studied the phenomenon. My crew was reassigned to other projects, but I could not leave it alone. Those voices had gotten into my head, and I found myself driving back to the site after hours, sitting in my truck and listening to them echo across the empty lot. That was when I noticed something nobody else had picked up on. The conversations were not random. They were cyclical. Every 17 hours and 43 minutes, the pattern repeated exactly. The same voices, the same phrases, the same 7-minute delay in their responses to our presence. It was like listening to a recording, except it had been playing long before we ever broke through the ice. I shared this observation with Dr. Brennan. She went pale when she verified it, because if the voices were repeating on a loop, that meant they were not responding to us in real time. They were not learning or mimicking. They were echoes of something that had already happened, something that had been trapped in the permafrost, playing over and over for God knows how long. But that created an impossible question. If these were just echoes, why did they incorporate sounds from our world? Why did they reflect back our questions and names? The only answer was worse than the mystery itself. The echoes were not from the past. They were from the future. We were hearing conversations that had not happened yet, recorded in ice and played back to us as warnings. The research team rejected this theory. They had to. It was too insane, too far outside the boundaries of accepted science. But I knew I was right. I could feel it every time I stood near that hole and listened to those voices discussing things in their incomprehensible language. They were talking about us. They were talking about what was going to happen. 3 weeks after the initial discovery, Dr. Brennan disappeared. She had been working late at the site, analyzing new recordings. Her car was found parked near Lot 47, engine still running, driver, his door open. Her equipment was set up at the edge of the excavation hole, still recording. But she was gone. No footprints leading away. No signs of struggle. Just her empty chair and the microphone dangling over the hole, capturing the voices as they continued their eternal conversation. The police investigated. Search teams combed the area. Nothing. It was like she had simply stepped out of existence. But when they reviewed the audio from that night, they found something that made them shut down the entire site. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Dr. Brennan's voice could be heard on the recording. Not speaking into the microphone, speaking from inside the hole. She was down there with the other voices, joining their conversation, speaking in that same unknown language as if she had always known it. The site was sealed. Concrete was poured into the hole. Official reports called it an unfortunate accident involving unstable permafrost and a tragic fall. But I had heard the recordings before they confiscated them. I knew what had really happened. She had not fallen. She had been called, and she had answered. I should have walked away then, taken my crew and never looked back. But I made the mistake of keeping one of Marcus's early recordings on my phone. Just a few minutes of audio from that first day, before things got complicated. I told myself it was just curiosity, a souvenir of the strangest job I had ever worked. But late at night, I would lie in bed and listen to those voices, trying to understand what they were saying. That was 2 months ago. Since then, I have started recognizing patterns, not linguistic patterns, temporal patterns. The voices are not speaking in sequence. They are speaking in layers, multiple timelines overlapping, past and future bleeding together in the frozen ground. And the more I listen, the more I understand. I can almost make out words now. Not English words, not any language that exists in our world. But I understand them anyway, the way you understand a dream while you are having it. They are describing a place where time does not move forward. A pocket of frozen existence where moments repeat endlessly, where people are trapped in loops of their own actions, playing out the same scenes forever. And they are describing how to get there. Last week, I started hearing my own voice in the recordings. Not exactly my voice, a version of it that sounds older, more tired, speaking in that fluid, incomprehensible language. It is buried under the other voices, easy to miss if you are not listening carefully. But it is there. I have heard myself saying my own name. I have heard myself describing things that have not happened yet. I have heard myself explaining how I ended up in the permafrost with the others. The construction company has moved on. Lot 47 remains sealed, marked as unsuitable for development due to unstable ground conditions. The official investigation into Dr. Brennan's disappearance concluded she suffered a mental breakdown and wandered into the wilderness. Everyone involved in the project has been encouraged to forget what we heard and move on with our lives. But I cannot forget, because I have started waking up in places I do not remember going. Yesterday, I woke up in my truck parked at the sealed site, my hands covered in frozen dirt, my phone playing that recording on repeat. I have no memory of driving there, no memory of trying to dig through the concrete seal. But my hands remember, my body remembers, and the voices remember me. I hired a private audio specialist, someone outside the project who could analyze the recordings without bias. He found something the official team had missed. Buried in the background static, underneath all the overlapping conversations, there is a heartbeat. Not one heartbeat, hundreds of them, thousands, all beating in perfect synchronization, as if they belong to a single entity. The permafrost is not just frozen ground. It is a storage medium. Every sound, every moment, every life that has ever touched it gets recorded in the ice, preserved forever in crystalline memory. And under certain conditions, when the frozen layers are disturbed in just the right way, those recordings begin to play. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Recordings cannot think. They cannot respond or adapt or learn, yet the voices do all of these things, which means they are not recordings at all. They are consciousnesses. People who became trapped in the permafrost, their minds frozen in time, existing in an eternal present where they speak and listen and speak again, forever. Dr. Brennan figured this out before she disappeared. I found her personal notes in a storage locker her family asked me to clear out. The last entry was dated the night she vanished. She wrote about how the permafrost was not a prison. It was a refuge, a place where time could not touch you, where you could exist outside the flow of cause and effect. She wrote about how the voices were not calling to her. They were welcoming her home. I think I understand what she meant now. Because when I listen to those voices, I do not feel afraid anymore. I feel peaceful. I feel like I am hearing old friends having conversations I have been part of for thousands of years. I feel like I am finally remembering something I have always known. The microphone is still running in my basement. I set it up a week ago, just to test something. I wanted to see if the voices could be heard anywhere, or if they were specific to that one location. It took 3 days, but they found me. They are coming through the speakers now, clearer than they ever were at the construction site. And they are calling my name, my real name, the one I had before I was David Marsh, the one I will have again when I join them in the frozen ground. I know what I have to do. I can feel it in my bones, in the same way a salmon knows to swim upstream or a bird knows to fly south. There's a place waiting for me beneath the ice, a moment in time that never ends. A conversation that has been going on since long before humans walked this earth and will continue long after we are gone. Tomorrow, I will return to Lot 47. I will break through the concrete seal they poured. I will climb down into the frozen darkness where the voices are waiting. And I will take my place among them, speaking in tongues that predate language, existing in a state between life and death, between past and future. This recording will be all that is left of who I was. David Marsh, construction foreman, 42 years old, no family, no ties keeping me in this world of linear time and forward motion. In a few hours, I will become something else. Someone else. One more voice in the eternal conversation happening just beneath your feet, in the frozen places where time forgets to move forward. If you ever find yourself in Fairbanks, if you ever hear voices coming from the ground, do not listen too closely. Do not try to understand what they are saying, because once you start hearing your own voice among them, once you start remembering the conversations you have not had yet, it will already be too late. The permafrost remembers everything, and soon, it will remember you too. Story 6. Trees that walk at Wonder Lake. I buried my ranger badge in the woods behind my house 3 months ago. 6 feet down, wrapped in plastic, like evidence from a crime scene. Because that's what it felt like. Evidence, proof that I'd been part of something I should have never survived. My therapist says I am experiencing delayed trauma response. She doesn't know what I really saw at Wonder Lake. Nobody does. Nobody living. Anyway, my name is David Harmon. I am 40 years old. Former park ranger at Denali National Park. I say former because I can to go back. Not after what happened in October. Not after I figured out what really took those 2 rangers in 1987. The official reports say they got lost. Exposure. A tragic accident in one of the most unforgiving landscapes in North America. But I found their last journal entry. I know what they saw before the forest took them. And now I know why the trees around Wonder Lake move when there's no wind. It started with the wolves. 3 weeks before I lost my partner, before everything went wrong, we started getting reports of unusual wolf behavior. Packs abandoning their territories. Animals that had lived in the same range for generations suddenly migrating south, away from Wonder Lake, like something had scared them off. Jack Moreno, my partner, thought it was climate change. Shifting prey patterns. He had reasonable explanations for everything. That was Jack, 20 years in the Park Service. Seen everything, trusted data over instinct. I trusted instinct, and my instinct was screaming that something was wrong. We hiked out to Wonder Lake on October 9th to investigate. The reports had mentioned strange sounds at night. Tourists camping near the lake described trees creaking and groaning, even on calm nights. One family packed up and left at 2 in the morning because they swore the forest was moving around their tent. Jack laughed when he read that report. People see what they expect to see in the wilderness. Shadows become bears. Wind becomes whispers. Fear makes the mind invent monsters. But when we reached the lake, Jack stopped laughing. The forest was silent. Completely silent. No birds. No insects. No rustling of small mammals in the underbrush. Just wind through the spruce and birch. And even that sounded wrong. Muffled. Absorbed by something we couldn't. TC. We stood on the shore of Wonder Lake. That massive body of water reflecting Denali, this peak. And the beauty of it felt like a lie. Like a postcard covering something rotten. Jack pulled out his radio and called base. His voice was steady, professional. He reported our arrival, confirmed our coordinates, said we de-investigate the area and report back in 6 hours. Standard procedure, but I saw his hand shaking when he clipped the radio back to his belt. He felt it too, that wrongness pressing down on us like atmospheric pressure before a storm. We split up to cover more ground. Jack took the western shore, I took the eastern trail. We agreed to meet back at the lake in 3 hours. I watched him disappear into the trees, his orange jacket bright against the autumn colors, and something in my gut told me to call him back. To tell him we should stay together. But I didn't. I followed protocol. I did my job. I wish I could listen to that instinct. The eastern trail wound through old-growth forest. Spruce trees that had been standing for 200 years. Their trunks thick as cars. Their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the light. The silence followed me. No matter how far I walked, no matter how deep into the forest I went, there were no animal sounds. Just my boots on the trail and my breathing inside my jacket. Then I noticed the trees. They were closer to the trail than they should have been. I hiked this route a dozen times. I knew the landmarks. There was a distinctive birch tree with a split trunk that should have been 20 feet from the path. But it was right there, next to the trail, close enough to touch. I stopped and stared at it, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew. Trees done. To move. They grow slowly, over decades, their roots anchored deep. They done. To relocate. I marked it as confusion. Fatigue. I'd been pulling double shifts, covering for rangers who quit after the busy summer season. My memory was playing tricks. I kept walking. Half a mile further, I found the first sign. A trail marker, wooden post with a carved arrow, lying on its side. The post had been pulled from the ground, not knocked over by wind or wildlife. Pulled. The hole where it had been planted was empty, the dirt disturbed, but there were no footprints. No sign of what had moved it. I picked up the post and examined it. The wood was scratched, deep gouges running lengthwise, like something with claws had gripped it. But the scratches were wrong. Too uniform, too deliberate. They looked almost like the growth rings you see inside a tree trunk. I radioed Jack, got static. Tried again, more static. The mountains interfered with signals sometimes, but we were in a valley. We should have had clear communication. I started back toward the lake, moving faster now, that instinct in my gut turning into full alarm. Something was wrong. Something had always been wrong here, and we walked right into it. That's when I heard the creaking. It came from all around me. The sound of wood bending under stress. Groaning. Shifting. I froze on the trail and looked up. The trees were swaying, all of them, moving in unison, their branches dipping and rising like they were breathing. But there was no wind. The air was completely still. My jacket didn't move. The leaves on the ground didn't stir. Only the trees moved. I started running. The trail twisted and turned, and with every turn, the trees seemed closer. Encroaching, their trunks leaning in, their branches reaching down. I could hear them moving behind me. That creaking and groaning growing louder, more urgent. Like the forest was waking up, like it had been waiting for me to realize the truth. And now that I had, it didn't need to pretend anymore. I burst out of the tree line onto the shore of Wonder Lake. Jack was there, standing at the water's edge, his back to me. He was facing the lake, perfectly still. Too still. I called his name. He didn't. He turned around. Didn't he acknowledge me? I ran toward him, my boots splashing through the shallow water at the shore. When I reached him, I grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. His face was pale. He was breathing, but barely. Shallow gasps like he'd forgotten how. And in his hand, he was holding something. A journal. Old. Leather-bound. The pages yellowed and water-stained. I took it from him and opened it. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The first entry was dated September 23rd, 1987. The last entry was October 7th, 1987. 2 weeks. The same 2 weeks the missing rangers had been out here before they vanished. I read the final entry out loud, trying to break through whatever shock had taken hold of Jack. The entry described trees moving at night. Slow, imperceptible movement. The rangers had set up camp and marked the positions of trees around them. By morning, the trees had shifted. Some were 3 feet closer. Others had moved to block the trail they used to reach the lake. The rangers had tried to leave, but the forest wouldn't let them. Every path they took looped back to Wonder Lake. Every trail led to the same clearing. And every night, the trees moved closer. The final line said this: they were not trees. They were something older, something that learned to look like trees. And now they were walking again. Jack finally spoke. His voice was a whisper, cracked and raw. He said he found the journal buried under a pile of stones near the western shore. Next to the stones were 2 orange jackets. Ranger jackets, torn and faded, but intact. The missing rangers had been here, had stayed here, and something had taken them. That is when the sun started setting. Darkness comes fast in Alaska in October. One moment there, it's light. The next moment the world is black. We had maybe 30 minutes before full dark. Jack wanted to stay, set up camp, document the journal, follow procedure. But I could see the trees at the edge of the clearing. They moved. In the time it took me to read that journal entry, they closed in. The forest around Wonder Lake was tighter now, denser. Like it was contracting. I grabbed Jack and started running. We followed our own tracks back, the trail we used to reach the lake. But after 5 minutes, we weren't on a trail anymore. We were in thick forest. No path, no markers, just trees. And the trees were moving. Not fast, not like monsters in movies. Slow, patient. They shift when we weren't looking directly at them. We turn our heads, and a trunk would be 2 feet to the left of where it had been. We look away, and a branch would lower, blocking our path. They were herding us, guiding us, keeping us in the forest. Jack pulled out his radio, tried to call for help. Static. Then, through the static, something else. A voice, distorted and wrong, but recognizable. It was Jack's voice, his own voice, coming through the radio, calling for help, describing trees that moved, using the exact words he'd been about to say. Like the forest was playing back something that hadn't happened yet, or something that had already happened. Over and over, a loop. We ran harder. Branches whipped our faces. Roots grabbed at our boots. The forest was fighting us now, trying to slow us down, trying to keep us. Jack was screaming into the radio. Nonsense words. Panic. I'd never seen him like that. 20 years of experience meant nothing here. Training meant nothing. We were prey. I saw light ahead. The edge of the forest. The parking area where we left our truck. We burst out of the trees and collapsed on the gravel. Behind us, the forest was still, silent. The trees stood like they always stood. Innocent. Just trees. But I knew better now. We drove back to headquarters without speaking. Jack clutched that journal the entire way, his knuckles white. When we arrived, he went straight to the director's office. Filed a report. Recommended the area around Wonder Lake be closed to the public pending investigation. The director listened, nodded, said he'd look into it. 3 days later, Jack didn't show up for work. I went to his house. His truck was in the driveway. His door was unlocked. Inside, everything was normal. Coffee pot on, TV playing low, but Jack was gone. His jacket was on the couch. His boots by the door. He'd left in socks. Or been taken. I found a note on his kitchen table. 4 words in his handwriting. They followed me home. I reported it. Search parties went out. They found nothing. Jack Moreno became another missing person statistic. The official report said he wandered off. Mental break. Stress. The wilderness takes people sometimes. But I knew what had taken him. I went back to Wonder Lake one more time. Alone. Against orders. I needed to understand. Needed to see if the journal had answers I missed. I hiked out in daylight, reached the shore, and started searching for where Jack had found it. The pile of stones was still there. The jackets were gone. And around the clearing, in a perfect circle, trees had grown. Overnight, trees that shouldn't exist. Their trunks were thin, young, but their roots went deep. Too deep for new growth. I counted them, 23 trees, the exact number of people who had gone missing in this area since the park was established. I understood then, the forest wasn't killing people. It was keeping them, changing them. Those weren't trees. They were people who stayed too long, who had been taken by something ancient, something that had learned to mimic the forest so perfectly that even experts couldn't tell the difference. I ran, again, for the last time. I made it back to my truck, drove straight to headquarters, submitted my resignation. The director tried to talk me out of it, said I was traumatized. Needed time. I didn't argue. Just turned in my badge and left. That was 3 months ago. I moved south, as far from Denali as I could get, but I still see them sometimes. Trees that stand too close to my house. Trees that weren't there yesterday. Trees that sway when the air is still. I know they followed me, just like they followed Jack. The forest has patience. It can wait. It's been waiting for thousands of years, growing and spreading, taking what it needs. If you ever visit Denali, stay away from Wonder Lake. If you camp in that area and you hear trees moving at night, pack up immediately. Dawn. Wait for morning. Dawn. To investigate. Just leave. Because the forest remembers. It remembers every person who walked under its canopy. And when it decides it wants you, no amount of running will help. Jack is out there now. I know he is. One of those trees around the clearing. Still trying to radio for help. Still calling my name. And someday, maybe soon, I'll be standing next to him. Rooted deep, silent, waiting for the next person to wander too close. The trees that walk at Wonder Lake are patient. They have all the time in the world. And they were always hungry for company. Story 7. Tunnel that swallowed time. I need to tell you about something that happened to me 3 weeks ago on Interstate 90. Because I know I am not losing my mind, even though everyone keeps saying I am. The doctors, my wife, the police, they all look at me with that same pitying expression, like I'm a broken thing that needs fixing. But I know what I saw. I know where I was. And I know that tunnel should not exist. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I was driving back from a sales conference in Spokane, heading east through the mountains of Montana. The kind of drive where you see maybe 3 cars an hour and the darkness between towns swallows everything. I had done this route 100 times. I knew every exit, every gas station, every place where the road curved along the mountainside. But that night, around 11:30, I saw something I had never seen before. A tunnel, not a small underpass or a bridge. A full tunnel carved into the mountain, with concrete walls and that distinctive orange glow of sodium vapor lights receding into the distance. The entrance appeared suddenly around a bend, and I did not have time to think about whether it should be there or not. I was already inside before my brain could catch up. The first thing I noticed was the silence. My radio cut out the moment I entered, replaced by a hollow kind of quiet that pressed against my eardrums. The rumble of my tires on the road sounded wrong, muffled, like I was hearing it through water. The tunnel stretched ahead farther than seemed possible for that section of highway. The lights created pools of sickly amber that my headlights barely penetrated. I checked my odometer, 0.3 miles, then 0.5, then 0.8. The tunnel kept going. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as a prickle of unease crawled up the back of my neck. I had driven this highway for 15 years. There was no tunnel here. There had never been a tunnel here. That was when I saw the other cars. They were scattered along the tunnel, pulled over to the side with their hazard lights blinking in synchronized rhythm. 4 of them that I could see, stretched out over what must have been half a mile. All of them empty. All of them with their doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-screen. I slowed down, my foot hovering over the brake. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to get out of this tunnel and back into the normal world where things made sense. But I'm the kind of person who stops when someone needs help. It is how I was raised. It is who I am. So I pulled over behind a silver Camry with Washington plates and put my car in park. The silence when I opened my door was absolute. No echo of my footsteps. No drip of water from the concrete above. Nothing. The air tasted metallic, like pennies on my tongue. And it was cold in a way that seemed to bypass my jacket and sink straight into my bones. The Camry was running. I could hear the engine idling, see the dash lights glowing through the windshield. A woman, its purse sat in the passenger seat, its contents spilled across the leather. Lipstick, receipts, a phone with a cracked screen showing 17 missed calls. The driver, his door was open exactly 18 inches. I measured it later in my mind, over and over, because details like that mattered when nothing else did. I called out. My voice sounded flat, absorbed by the tunnel walls before it could travel more than a few feet. No one answered. I walked to the next car, a red pickup truck, and found the same thing. Engine running, door open, personal belongings scattered like someone had left in a hurry. A coffee cup in the holder still warm to the touch. That was when I heard the sound. It came from deeper in the tunnel, from beyond where the lights faded into solid darkness. A scraping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, like metal dragging across concrete. It would stop for exactly 10 seconds, then start again. Scrape, 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 10 seconds of silence. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I should have gotten back in my car. I should have driven away as fast as the engine would take me. But there was something about that sound that pulled at me, something that made me think someone was trying to signal for help. So I started walking deeper into the tunnel, following the white line painted on the road because it was the only thing that seemed solid and real. The temperature dropped with every step. My breath came out in white clouds that hung in the air longer than they should have. The sodium lights began to flicker, creating stuttering shadows that moved independently of my body. And the sound kept getting closer. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I found the source about 200 yards in. It was a maintenance cart, the kind highway workers use to haul equipment. It sat in the middle of the road, tilted at an angle, with one wheel twisted at an impossible angle. The scraping sound came from a shovel that had been tied to the back, dragging against the road surface. But there was no wind in the tunnel, no reason for it to move. Yet it swung back and forth, creating that methodical scraping that echoed off the walls. Behind the cart, I saw them. 5 people standing in a line across the width of the tunnel. They wore orange safety vests that glowed in the dim light, and yellow hard hats that cast shadows across where their faces should be. I say should be because I could not see their features. Not because it was too dark. Not because they were too far away. But because their faces were smooth and blank, like mannequins that had never been painted. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for what felt like a full second before kicking back into a racing rhythm that made spots dance across my vision. I stumbled backward, and one of them raised a hand. Not threatening, not reaching for me, just raising it slowly, palm out, in a gesture that might have been a warning or might have been a greeting. I ran. My legs carried me back toward my car on pure adrenaline, my shoes slapping against the concrete in a panicked rhythm. Behind me, I heard nothing. No footsteps chasing me, no voices calling out, just that same hollow silence that seemed to swallow all sound. I reached my car and threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle shook. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw the transmission into drive, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The car lurched forward, tires squealing, and I focused on the end of the tunnel that had to be ahead somewhere. But the tunnel had changed. The abandoned cars were gone. All of them. The road was empty, stretching ahead into that same orange darkness that seemed to have no end. The lights flickered faster now, creating a strobe effect that made my eyes hurt. And in my rearview mirror, I saw the 5 figures standing exactly where I had left them, perfectly still, watching me drive away with their featureless faces. I drove for what felt like an hour, but my dashboard clock said was only 4 minutes. The tunnel twisted and turned in ways I knew were impossible, curving back on itself, rising and falling like a roller coaster carved through the mountain. My speedometer climbed to 70, then 80, then 90, but the tunnel just kept going. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it ended. One moment I was surrounded by concrete walls and failing lights. The next, I burst out into the open night air of the highway, with the white lines of the road stretching ahead under a clear sky full of stars. I slammed on the brakes, my car fishtailing across both lanes before coming to a stop on the shoulder. I sat there for 10 minutes, gasping for breath, watching the road behind me for any sign of the tunnel entrance. It was not there. Where the tunnel should have been was just mountain, solid and unbroken, with trees growing up the slope and a guardrail following the curve of the highway. I got out of my car and walked back, running my hands over the rock face, looking for any seam or opening. Nothing, just cold stone and the smell of pine needles. I drove to the next town and went straight to the police station. The officer on duty listened to my story with increasing skepticism, his expression shifting from concern to pitying to annoyed. He pulled up maps of the highway on his computer and showed me satellite images. No tunnel. He pulled accident reports and construction records. No tunnel. He asked if I had been drinking, if I was on any medications, if I had a history of seizures or hallucinations. I went home and started researching. That was when I found the others. Buried in obscure forums and local newspaper archives, I discovered dozens of reports from 1973. Drivers on Old State Route 39 near Whittier, California, all describing the same experience. A tunnel that should not exist, abandoned cars, and most chillingly, rescue workers with faces they could not describe, faces their minds refused to process or remember. The incidents happened over 3 months, then stopped abruptly in December. A psychological study was commissioned. The researchers concluded it was mass hysteria, a shared delusion triggered by stress and long-distance driving fatigue. They gave it a name, the Whittier phenomenon. The tunnel became an urban legend, a ghost story truckers told at rest stops. The highway was eventually rerouted, and people forgot. But I found something else in those archives, a detail buried in a police report from October 28, 1973. One of the drivers, a man named Robert Chen, claimed his dashboard clock lost exactly 4 hours during his time in the tunnel. He said he entered at 9:15 p.m. and emerged at 9:19 p.m. But his watch, which he had synchronized that morning, showed 1:23 a.m. I checked my phone records from that night. I had sent a text to my wife at 11:28 p.m., just before entering the tunnel. The message was delivered, but my next communication, a frantic call to 911 from the next town, was timestamped at 3:47 a.m. 4 hours and 19 minutes I cannot account for. The doctors say I experienced a fugue state, a dissociative episode brought on by stress. My wife wants me to see a specialist. My company has put me on medical leave. Everyone has an explanation that makes sense in the normal world where tunnels do not appear and disappear, where time moves in a straight line, where rescue workers have faces. But I know what happened. And I know I am not the only one. 2 days ago, I received a message through one of the forums. No name attached, just an anonymous post that appeared in a thread I had been following. It said 3 words, "We are waiting." I have started driving that highway again at night, searching for the tunnel. I know my wife thinks I am obsessed, that I am making everything worse by refusing to let it go. But I need to know what happened in those 4 hours. I need to understand what I saw, because last night, while I was parked on the shoulder at the place where the tunnel should be, I found something on my windshield. A piece of paper tucked under the wiper blade, even though no other cars had passed in 20 minutes. The paper was orange, the same color as those safety vests, and it was covered in text written in a shaking hand. The message said, "The 1973 collapse was real. We've been trying to get out for 52 years. Every October, the wall's thin. We can almost reach through. If you come back, bring others. We need witnesses. We need people to remember that we existed, that we are still here, still trapped in the moment the mountain came down." At the bottom, there were 4 names listed. 4 of the 5 drivers who reported the Whittier phenomenon in 1973 and were never seen again after giving their statements to police. I am going back tomorrow night. I know I should not. I know it is dangerous. But those people have been trapped for 5 decades in a tunnel that does not exist, with rescue workers who have no faces, in a space where time folds back on itself. And somehow, impossibly, they are still trying to get out. I need to know if I can help them. Or if, the next time I enter that tunnel, I will become one of them, standing in an orange vest with a face that no one can describe, waiting for the next driver who sees something that should not be there. The thing that terrifies me most is not what I saw. It is what my wife told me this morning. She said that last night, while I was out on the highway, she woke up at 3 a.m. to find me standing in our bedroom doorway. Standing perfectly still, staring at her with an expression she could not quite describe, an expression her mind refused to process. She said I stood there for a full minute before climbing back into bed. She said I was cold to the touch, as cold as concrete. And she said when she asked me about it this morning, I insisted I had never left the highway, that I had been parked on the shoulder all night. I do not remember coming home. I do not remember standing in that doorway. But I believe her, because when I checked my phone this morning, there was a photo in my gallery that I did not take. A picture of 5 people in orange vests, standing in what looks like a tunnel, their faces turned toward the camera. And I am standing among them, wearing a vest I do not own, in a tunnel that does not exist, staring at the camera with the same blank expression that has no features my mind can hold on to. The photo was taken last night at 3:07 a.m. According to my GPS log, at that exact moment, I was parked on the shoulder of Interstate 90, 73 miles from my house. Story 8. Phantom Bear of Brooks Camp 1 never should have taken that ranger position at Katmai. The moment I saw it standing there, translucent and wrong, walking straight through a pine tree like it wasn't, even there, I knew my life would never be the same. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I am writing this from a motel room in Anchorage, hands still shaking, because people need to know what is really happening at Brooks Camp. The job posting seemed perfect. Remote ranger position, Alaska wilderness, monitoring the famous brown bears during salmon season. Good pay, isolation, nature. Everything a burned-out Seattle cop needed after 15 years of dealing with humanity. It's worst. The recruiter mentioned some recent staff turnover but blamed it on the harsh conditions. Should have been my first warning. I arrived at Brooks Camp in late July, peak salmon run. The place was crawling with tourists, their expensive cameras ready to capture the grizzlies fishing at the falls. My supervisor, Tom, looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, nervous twitch in his left hand. He gave me the standard orientation, showed me the viewing platforms, explained the safety protocols. Then, right before leaving me at my cabin, he grabbed my arm. His grip was ice cold. He whispered something about staying inside after midnight, about not investigating sounds, about the bear that doesn't leave tracks. I laughed it off as hazing the new guy. Tom didn't laugh back. My first week was normal, beautiful, even. Dozens of massive browns congregating at the falls, teaching their cubs to fish. Eagles circling overhead, the raw power of nature on full display. I cataloged behaviors, managed tourist traffic, checked trail cameras. Standard stuff. The other rangers seemed friendly enough, though they all had this underlying tension. Like they were waiting for something. Night shifts were different. The camp transforms after dark. What feels majestic during daylight becomes oppressive when the sun drops behind the mountains. The constant sound of rushing water masks other noises. Your flashlight beam only shows you a small circle of safety. Beyond that circle, anything could be watching. It started with the motion sensors. Third night on duty, around 2 in the morning. Sensor 7 triggered near the lower platform. Then 8, then 9. Sequential, like something walking the trail. Protocol says investigate potential bear activity to prevent surprise encounters with early morning hikers. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The trail was empty. No tracks in the mud. No broken branches. No scat. Nothing. But the sensors kept triggering behind me as I walked back, following me. I quickened my pace. That primal fear rising in my chest. The sensors stopped at the edge of camp. I reported it to Tom the next morning. His face went pale. He pulled me into his office, closed the door, checked the windows. That's when he told me about the sightings. 5 rangers in the past 2 months had reported the same thing. A massive brown bear, easily 1,200 pounds, but translucent. Semi-transparent, you could see the trees through its body. It moved through solid objects like they weren't there. Never left tracks, never showed up on cameras. Corporate dismissed it as stress hallucinations, altitude sickness, isolation paranoia. But Tom had seen it himself. Twice. The second time, it had stood outside his cabin for 3 hours, just watching through the window with eyes that weren't quite right. Eyes that reflected light from sources that didn't exist. I thought he was having a breakdown until I reviewed the sensor logs. The pattern was impossible. The triggered sensors formed a path that went straight through the equipment shed. Through the wall. No animal could do that. No normal animal. The next few nights, I stayed inside after midnight like Tom suggested. But I watched from my window, and I started noticing things. Shadows moving against the wind. The sudden silence when all the normal forest sounds stopped at once. The feeling of being observed by something that shouldn't exist. Then came the night of August 15th. A tourist had gone missing. Japanese photographer. Expensive gear. Last seen heading toward the restricted area north of camp. We organized a search party at dawn. Found his camera equipment scattered near an old native fishing site. The memory card was corrupted except for one image. It showed a massive bear-shaped distortion, like looking at the forest through warped glass. In the distortion, as center, 2 points of impossible light. We never found the photographer. The incidents escalated after that. Rangers started requesting transfers. Some just left without notice. Tom stopped sleeping. He set up motion cameras around his cabin, infrared sensors, electromagnetic field detectors he deordered online. He was convinced the thing was getting bolder, getting hungrier. I started researching the area, its history during my off hours. Brooks Camp sits on ancient ground. The native peoples had stories about this place long before we arrived. Stories about a guardian spirit that turned malevolent. A bear that walked between worlds, punishing those who disrespected the sacred fishing grounds. The elders stopped coming here decades ago. 3 nights ago, everything changed. I was doing my rounds when every sensor in Sector 4 triggered simultaneously. Not in sequence, all at once. I radioed Tom. No response. Checked his cabin. Empty. Door standing open. His equipment was going haywire. EMF detector screaming. Infrared camera showing massive temperature drops in random spots. I saw it then. Really saw it. Standing in the middle of camp. Translucent flesh rippling like water. 12 feet tall on its hind legs. Its body was there but not there, a contradiction that hurt to perceive. Through its transparent bulk, I could see the forest beyond, distorted and wrong. Its eyes were the worst part. They burned with a cold light that seemed to look through me, into me, past me, all at once. It moved toward me. No, through the space between us. Distance meant nothing to it. One moment it was 50 feet away. The next, close enough that I could see my terrified reflection in those impossible eyes. The air temperature dropped 30 degrees. My breath came out in clouds. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed. It reached out one massive paw. Translucent claws passed through my chest. No pain, but a cold beyond description. Like every cell in my body suddenly remembered it would one day die. In that moment, I saw things. Flashes of other places, other times. Rangers who disappeared over the years. Tourists who wandered too far. Tom, standing in a place that wasn't quite here, wasn't quite there. His mouth open in a silent scream. The bear pulled back, seemed to consider me. Then it turned and walked through the main lodge, through the wall, through reality itself, and vanished into the forest. I ran, packed nothing, took a boat across the lake, hitchhiked to the nearest town, caught the first flight to Anchorage. But it doesn't matter how far I go. I can feel it, that cold spot in my chest where it touched me. Growing, spreading. Last night, I woke up to find my hand translucent. I could see the motel bed sheets through my palm. It lasted only seconds, but I know what it means. Whatever that thing is, wherever it comes from, it marked me. Changed me. Becoming like it. Tom called my phone an hour ago. The number was disconnected 3 days ago when he disappeared. His voice was distant, echoing, like he was calling from the bottom of a well. He said the bear ISN to just one entity. It's a doorway. A crack between our world and somewhere else. Every person it touches becomes part of that crack. Eventually, we all walk through walls, through trees, through reality. He said there are dozens of them now. Former rangers, photographers, hikers. All translucent, all hungry, all waiting in the spaces between things. They spreading outward from Brooks Camp, one touch at a time. I am writing this as a warning. Stay away from Camp May. Stay away from Brooks Camp. If you see a bear that doesn't, to leave tracks. Dawn, to investigate. Dawn, to be curious. Dawn, to try to photograph it. Run. Run far and fast and never look back. My left arm is fading now. I can see the wall through it. The cold is spreading faster. I estimate I have maybe 6 hours before I'm gone completely. Before I become one of them. Another phantom in the wilderness, walking through walls, marking others, expanding the crack. The worst part is that I am not scared anymore. The cold feels almost comforting now, like coming home, like I belong in those spaces between things, in that place where the phantom bears roam. Part of me wants to go back to Brooks Camp, wants to stand with the others in the translucent herd, wants to touch more people and share this terrible gift. If you see a semi-transparent person in the woods, especially near Alaska, done. to let them touch you. That might be me, or Tom, or any of the dozens who have been marked. We don't want to hurt you, but we help ourselves. We drawn to warm, solid life, drawn to pull more souls into the space between the bare ISN to the real threat. It is just the beginning, the first crack in a dam that is about to burst. Once enough of us exist in that translucent state, something larger will push through. Something that makes a 12-foot phantom bear look like a house pet. My time is up. Both hands are see-through now. This motel room is starting to feel less real, less solid. I can hear Tom calling me. Others too. Voices from the in-between place. Don, to come looking for me. Don, to come to Alaska. And whatever you do, never trust a bear that walks through walls. The cold is everywhere now. It's almost peaceful, almost beautiful. I'm going through. Story 9. Ice Woman of Mendenhall Glacier. I should have trusted my gut when the ice started singing. That is what the locals call it when Mendenhall Glacier shifts and cracks in the summer heat. They say it sounds like distant voices, like someone calling from deep inside the frozen mass. But I am a glaciologist, not a superstitious Alaskan tour guide. So I ignored the warnings. I had a job to do. The university wanted thermal imaging data on the glacier, this unprecedented thaw rate. Climate change was accelerating the melt faster than anyone predicted, and my team needed hard numbers. What I found instead changed everything I understood about what can be preserved in ice. The first anomaly appeared on my drone footage 3 days into the survey. I was alone at base camp, reviewing the thermal scans on my laptop while rain hammered against my tent. The glacier stretched out before me like a sleeping giant, its surface riddled with new crevasses and meltwater rivers that hadn't existed the previous summer. My drone had mapped every inch of the exposed ice face, capturing thousands of high-resolution images. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of light and shadow, some geological formation that resembled a human shape. But the more I zoomed in, the clearer it became. Approximately 40 feet below the surface, suspended in ice that should have been solid and opaque, was the unmistakable silhouette of a woman. Her arms were raised above her head, frozen mid-reach, as if she had been clawing toward the surface when the ice claimed her. The thermal imaging showed something impossible. The area around the figure registered 2 degrees warmer than the surrounding glacier. Dead things don't degenerate heat. I spent the next 6 hours analyzing every frame, every angle, cross-referencing the coordinates with historical surveys. The figure appeared in multiple scans from different positions, ruling out any camera glitch or atmospheric interference. I measured her proportions against the known dimensions of the ice face. She was real, or at least, something very real was trapped in that glacier. Something roughly the size and shape of an adult human female. The local legend suddenly didn't seem so ridiculous anymore. Every town within 50 miles of Mendenhall has its own version of the story. Some say she was a Tlingit woman who ventured onto the glacier during a harsh winter 2 centuries ago and never returned. Others claim she is much older, a remnant from when the first peoples crossed the land bridge from Asia. A few of the older fishermen swear she appears during major thaw events, visible through the translucent ice, always reaching upward, always trying to break free. They say people who see her start having dreams. Dark dreams about being trapped, about suffocating under endless weight, about cold so profound it feels like fire. I didn't believe in curses or ghost stories. But that night, I had the first dream. I was inside the glacier, entombed in crystal blue darkness. The pressure was unbearable, crushing my chest, forcing the air from my lungs. I could see light filtering down from above, distorted and unreachable. I tried to scream, but my mouth filled with ice water so cold it burned. My arms wouldn't move. They were frozen above my head in an eternal gesture of desperation. And then I felt her presence. Not saw her, felt her. She was all around me, inside the ice itself, watching through 1,000 frozen eyes. She was hungry, not for food or warmth, but for something else. Something I couldn't name but instinctively feared. I woke up gasping, my sleeping bag soaked with sweat despite the 40-degree temperature inside my tent. The rational part of my brain insisted it was just stress and isolation playing tricks. I had been alone in the wilderness for 72 hours, analyzing disturbing imagery. My mind naturally conjured nightmares. But the dream felt different from normal sleep. It felt like a memory that didn't belong to me, like I had briefly accessed someone else's final moments. I decided to go back to the glacier at first light and take physical ice core samples from the area surrounding the anomaly. If something organic was truly preserved in there, the cores would show elevated microbial activity or chemical markers. Hard data would either confirm or dismiss what I thought I was seeing. Science would provide answers. It always did. The hike to the glacier face took 90 minutes through terrain that grew increasingly unstable. Meltwater had transformed familiar paths into rushing streams. Sections of trail I had used just days earlier had collapsed into muddy sinkholes. The glacier itself looked different, more exposed, almost vulnerable. Fresh calving had sheared off a massive section near the terminus, revealing layers of ice that hadn't seen daylight in millennia. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the clean, mineral scent of glacial melt. This was organic, wrong, like meat left too long in a broken freezer. It grew stronger as I approached the coordinates where the figure appeared in my scans. I pulled out my thermal camera and swept the ice face. The heat signature was still there, but it had changed. It was stronger now, more defined, and impossibly, it had moved. The figure was 15 feet higher than it had been yesterday, closer to the surface, as if it was rising through the ice. My hands shook as I set up my core drilling equipment. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to pack my gear and hike back to civilization and never think about Mendenhall Glacier again. But my scientific training wouldn't allow it. I needed to understand what I was seeing. I needed proof. The drill bit into the ice with a high-pitched whine that echoed across the valley. It took 20 minutes to extract the first core sample, a cylinder of compressed ice that represented decades of accumulated snowfall. Under normal circumstances, the ice would be crystal clear or perhaps cloudy with trapped air bubbles. This core was neither. Frozen into the ice, scattered throughout its length like dark stars, were what appeared to be human hairs. Long, black hairs, perfectly preserved. The second core was worse. 8 feet down, the drill brought up ice-stained rust red. Blood, old blood, but not ancient. The discoloration was too vivid, too well preserved for something that should have been buried for centuries. And embedded in the bloody ice, pressed against the side of the core sample like a flower in glass, was a human fingernail. It was torn and ragged, as if it had been ripped out during some desperate struggle. That is when the glacier groaned. The sound started deep, subterranean, a bass rumble that I felt in my bones before I heard it. Then came the cracking, sharp reports like rifle shots that ricocheted off the surrounding mountains. The ice face in front of me spider-webbed with fresh fractures. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my equipment, as a section of glacier the size of a city bus calved away and crashed into the meltwater lake below, sending up a wave that soaked my boots. And there, in the freshly exposed ice wall, was a hand. Not a shadowy outline or thermal signature. An actual human hand, pressed flat against translucent blue ice, fingers splayed wide. The skin was gray-white, preserved by the cold, but the details were horrifyingly clear. I could see the lines on her palm, the wrinkles around her knuckles, the dark crescents under her fingernails where she had clawed at the ice. She was only 10 feet below the surface now, trapped behind a thin wall of rapidly melting glacier. At the current thaw rate, she would be completely exposed within 48 hours. I should have left then. I should have called the authorities, the university, the National Park Service, anyone. But I couldn't. To move. I was transfixed by that hand, by the impossible nature of its preservation, by the question that consumed every other thought. How was she so perfectly intact? Even in optimal frozen conditions, human tissue degrades, cells rupture, decay sets in. This woman looked like she had been entombed yesterday, not centuries ago. Then her fingers moved. It was subtle, barely perceptible, just the smallest curl of her index finger. But I saw it. The ice around her hand fractured slightly, fresh cracks spreading from each fingertip. She was pushing against the barrier, testing its strength, and the ice was yielding. I ran. I don't remember packing my equipment or navigating back down the trail. My next clear memory is being inside my tent, hyperventilating into my sleeping bag, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Corpses done. To move. Frozen tissue doesn't. To contract. It was impossible. It was a trick of light, or the ice settling, or my exhausted mind misinterpreting what it saw. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was waking up inside Mendenhall Glacier, and I had helped free it. The dreams came every night after that, more vivid and terrifying each time. I was always trapped in ice, always drowning in frozen darkness. But now I wasn't alone. She was there with me, her face pressed close to mine, her mouth open in a soundless scream. Her eyes were the worst part. They weren't dead or empty. They were aware, intelligent, and absolutely furious. She had been conscious through every moment of her imprisonment, feeling the weight of the glacier, the passage of time, the slow compression of centuries, and she blamed everyone who had walked over her frozen tomb without digging her out. She blamed me most of all for finding her but not setting her free. On the fourth night, I woke to find frost covering the inside of my tent despite the season. My breath came out in clouds. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees in a matter of hours, impossible for a summer night in southeast Alaska. And I heard something outside, moving through the darkness with slow, deliberate steps. The footsteps were wrong, too heavy, like someone walking with frozen joints, their movements stiff and grinding. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the tent entrance. A shadow passed across the fabric, tall and angular, moving in a way that human bodies don't move. It circled my tent 3 times, and with each pass, the temperature dropped further. My water bottle froze solid. Ice crystals formed on my sleeping bag. My fingers went numb. Then the scratching started. Long nails dragging across canvas, the same sound that had haunted my dreams, the sound of someone clawing their way out of an ice tomb. The scratches formed patterns, deliberate marks that spelled out a single word in frost. Mine. By morning, she was gone, but her message remained etched in ice across my tent. I broke camp in record time and hiked to the nearest ranger station. I tried to explain what I had found, show them my footage and core samples, told them about the hand in the ice. They listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. To them, I was just another researcher who had spent too much time alone in the wilderness, my judgment compromised by isolation and stress. They agreed to investigate, but their timeline was bureaucratic and slow. It would be at least a week before they could send a team to the site. A week was too long. At the current melt rate, she would be free in days. I had to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I was the only one who understood the urgency. Something terrible was about to emerge from that glacier, and I couldn't let it happen without witnesses, without documentation, without warning someone who might believe me. The hike back felt like walking into a nightmare I couldn't escape. The glacier had changed dramatically in just 36 hours. Whole sections had collapsed, exposing deep ice caves that exhaled cold air and that terrible organic smell. The heat signature on my thermal camera had vanished entirely, which meant only one thing. She was no longer surrounded by ice. She was out. I found the spot where I had taken my core samples. The ice wall was gone, melted away or broken apart. In its place was a cavity, a hollow roughly the size of a human body, with drag marks leading away from it down the glacier. Something had emerged and crawled toward the forest, leaving behind a trail of meltwater and scattered black hairs. The tracks led into the dense Sitka spruce forest that bordered the glacier. I followed them for 20 minutes until they reached a small clearing where they simply stopped. Not branched off or disappeared into undergrowth. They ended abruptly in the center of the clearing as if whatever made them had simply evaporated. But I knew she hadn't vanished. I could feel her watching me from somewhere in the shadows, studying me with the same intensity I had studied her frozen form. She had waited centuries for someone to find her, and now that I had, we were connected in a way I didn't fully understand but desperately feared. I heard her voice for the first time that night in my hotel room back in Juneau. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a thought that didn't belong to me, words forming in my mind in a language I didn't speak but somehow comprehended. She told me her name was Sedna, though whether that was her true name or something my mind created to make sense of what she was, I'll never know. She told me she had been young when the ice took her, barely 20 winters old, caught in a storm while searching for her lost brother. The glacier had swallowed her whole, pulling her down into its frozen belly where she remained conscious but unable to move, unable to die, for longer than human memory could measure. The ice had changed her. Centuries of isolation and cold had transformed her into something that was no longer entirely human. She was part of the glacier now, made of its ancient patience and merciless hunger. And now that she was free, she had no intention of returning to that frozen prison. But freedom came with a cost. Her body, preserved for so long by the ice, was unstable in normal temperatures. She needed the cold to survive, needed to draw heat from living things to maintain her frozen state. She needed to feed. The disappearances started 3 days later. A hiker vanished from the West Glacier Trail. Then 2 kayakers never returned from Mendenhall Lake. Search parties found their equipment but no bodies, just drag marks leading into the ice caves and that same terrible smell I had first noticed at the glacier face. The authorities established a perimeter around the glacier and closed all trails, but it didn't matter. Sedna wasn't confined to the ice anymore. People reported seeing a woman in gray clothing wandering through Juneau late at night, her skin pale as snow, frost forming on windows when she passed. She appeared in mirrors and reflections, always watching, always reaching. And she kept visiting my dreams, showing me memories that couldn't possibly be mine. I saw the world through her eyes, experienced her endless imprisonment, felt the crushing weight of time and ice. She wanted me to understand what had been done to her, how the glacier had stolen her life and transformed her into a monument to suffering. But more than that, she wanted me to understand that she wasn't finished. For every year she had spent frozen and aware, she would claim a life. The glacier had taken centuries from her. She would take centuries in return. I left Alaska 2 weeks ago, fled back to the lower 48, back to civilization and warmth and safety. But it doesn't matter where I go. I can feel the cold following me, creeping into my apartment even when the heat is running. Frost forms on my windows in patterns that look like reaching hands. My breath clouds the air even in summer. Last night, I found black hairs on my pillow. Long, preserved hairs that smelled like glacial ice and ancient rage. She's getting stronger, learning to exist in this new world, adapting to the heat that should destroy her. And I realize now that finding her wasn't an accident. The glacier didn't release her by chance. She called to me through my equipment, through my dreams, guided my drone to that exact spot because she needed someone to witness her emergence, someone to tell her story. I was never investigating the glacier. I was always the one being investigated, tested, chosen. Tomorrow, I'm going back to Mendenhall. Not to study or document or warn anyone. I'm going because she is calling me home, back to the ice where I belong. I can feel my body temperature dropping day by day. My skin is taking on that gray-white pallor I first saw in her preserved hand. I'm becoming like her. Another frozen thing that can quite die. Another warning trapped in ice for future generations to uncover. If you, re-listening to this, stay away from Mendenhall Glacier. Ignore the tour guides who say it is safe. Dismiss the park rangers who insist that disappearances were accidents or animal attacks. The ice remembers everything buried inside it, and some things were never meant to thaw. The glacier is still singing, but now I understand what it is saying. It is not warnings or distant voices. It is Sedna, calling out to the cold darkness between stars, inviting something older and hungrier to join her in this warming world. And I think something is finally answering back. Story 10. Known silence I should have turned back when the radio died. Not static, not interference, complete, suffocating silence. My pickup truck, its engine still hummed beneath me on that frozen Alaska highway, but the sound felt wrong, muffled, like hearing it through water. I checked my phone. No signal. The clock read 11:13 p.m. 20 miles outside Nome, darkness pressed against my windshield like a living thing. I'd driven this route 100 times, hauling supplies between Anchorage and the remote villages. But that February night in 2016, something fundamental had changed about the world, and I was about to drive straight into it. The headlights caught movement ahead. A figure stood in the middle of the road, perfectly still. As I slowed down, I realized it was a state trooper whose vehicle parked sideways across both lanes. The officer stood beside it, flashlight pointed at the ground, not moving, not even shivering despite the sub-zero temperature. I rolled down my window to call out, and that's when I understood something was deeply wrong. My voice made no sound. I tried again, shouting this time. Nothing. My lips moved, air left my lungs, but the world swallowed every decibel. The trooper slowly turned his head toward me. His mouth opened and closed frantically, eyes wide with terror, but no words reached me. We stared at each other across 20 feet of impossible silence. Then he pointed behind me. I turned to look back down the highway. Every vehicle I passed in the last few minutes had stopped. Their occupants stood outside their cars, all facing the same direction, toward Nome. They stood motionless in the Arctic cold, breath creating clouds of vapor that dissipated into the darkness. Men, women, children, all standing perfectly still, all staring at something I couldn't see. My hands trembled as I put the truck in reverse. The trooper grabbed his chest suddenly, dropping to his knees, his mouth stretched wide in what must have been a scream. But the silence consumed it. Blood seeped through his fingers. He collapsed onto the frozen asphalt. And I knew with absolute certainty that if I stayed, I would join him. I floored it backward, swerving around the abandoned vehicles. The speedometer hit 40, 50, driving in reverse on a dark highway because turning around meant stopping, and stopping meant becoming one of those statues. In my mirrors, I watched the trooper's body convulse once, then go still. That's when the silence truly hit me, not just the absence of sound, the complete erasure of it. My heartbeat, gone. The truck's engine, silent. The tires on pavement, nothing. It felt like drowning in emptiness, like the world had forgotten how to make noise. My ears ached from the pressure of absolute quiet. As I reversed past the standing people, some began walking toward Nome. Not running, not hurrying, walking with mechanical precision, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Their faces remained blank, eyes unfocused, moving in perfect synchronization. A mother carried her infant, the baby, its mouth open in what should have been crying. An elderly man limped forward, his cane making no tap against the ground. 5 miles out, I finally found a place wide enough to turn around. As I spun the wheel, my headlights swept across the forest beside the road. Eyes reflected back. Hundreds of them. Wolves, foxes, rabbits, even birds on the ground. All standing motionless. All facing Nome. The animals should have scattered from the light, but they remained frozen, waiting. I drove faster than I'd ever driven that road, pushing 90 on ice-slicked pavement. The silence followed me like a predator, pressing against the windows, trying to seep through the vents. My nose started bleeding. First a trickle, then a stream. The pressure in my skull built until I thought my eyes might burst. At exactly 11:47 p.m., sound returned. The roar of the engine hit me like a physical blow. My own gasping breaths, the squeal of tires, the radio bursting back to life with static. It all crashed over me at once. I pulled over and vomited from the sensory overload, my ears ringing, hands shaking uncontrollably. The radio crackled. Through the static, I heard fragments of emergency broadcasts. Residents of Nome are advised to remain indoors. Unexplained phenomenon. 17 casualties. Do not approach the town limits. I spent the night in my truck at a rest stop 50 miles away, engine running, radio on, terrified of silence. When dawn finally came, I drove back toward Nome, stopping at the point where I first lost sound. Emergency vehicles blocked the road. FBI, military, hazmat teams, the kind of response you see in movies. A young FBI agent approached my window. Her eyes had the hollow look of someone who'd seen something that broke their understanding of the world. She asked me questions for 3 hours, recording everything, making me repeat details. When I described the standing people, she exchanged glances with her partner. How many walked toward town? She asked. Maybe 30 or 40. She closed her notepad. We found 12 bodies on this stretch of road, all cardiac arrest. The ones who walked. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We found them. The official report called it a mass hysteria event triggered by infrasound from seismic activity. They said the silence was a shared delusion, that the deaths were coincidental heart attacks from panic. But I know what I experienced. For exactly 47 minutes, Nome, Alaska, existed in a bubble outside our reality, and something used that silence to take people. I quit trucking after that night. Moved to Phoenix, about as far from Alaska as I could get. But sometimes, usually around 11:13 p.m., I'll notice the sounds around me starting to fade. The air conditioner becomes muffled, the traffic outside grows distant. I'll turn up the TV, play music on my phone, anything to fill the space before it arrives. Because I learned something that night outside Nome. Real silence isn't empty. It is hungry. And once it has tasted you, it never stops following. The FBI contacted me again last month. There have been 3 more events. Shorter durations, different locations, but the same pattern. Complete silence. People walking toward a central point, bodies found with burst hearts. They wanted to know if I experienced anything since Nome. I told them about the fading sounds, the way quiet spaces make my nose bleed. They weren't surprised. Turns out, I'm not the only survivor who hears it coming. We scattered across the country. 24 people who drove away from silence events before they peaked. We all report the same thing, the gradual muffling of our environment, always starting at 11:13 p.m. local time, lasting exactly 4 minutes before either fading away or blooming into full silence. The agent told me they recalling us listeners. They think we somehow attuned to whatever causes these events, able to sense them building. They want us to help predict the next one. But I know the truth they want to admit. We're not detecting these silences. We recalling them. Every night at 11:13, when the world starts to muffle around me, I feel it pulling. The silence wants me back. It left something inside me that night, a seed of perfect quiet that grows stronger every day. Sometimes I catch myself walking toward it, feet moving without conscious thought, drawn to that beautiful, terrible emptiness. The other listeners report the same compulsion. 2 have already disappeared, walking out of their homes at 11:13 and never returning. Their families found them 3 days later, standing in empty fields, catatonic, hearts barely beating. The doctors can explain how they still alive with such minimal cardiac function. Let it take me. They soundproof my bedroom, installed locks that engage automatically at 11 p.m. I sleep with noise machines, white noise, brown noise, anything to keep the silence at bay. But I know it's temporary. The seed inside me grows stronger, and one night, the locks want to be enough. If you rereading this and you ever experience a sudden, complete silence, run. Dawn, to investigate. Dawn, to look for others. Just run. Drive until sound returns, then keep driving. And whatever you do, dawn, to stop when you see them standing in the road, all facing the same direction, walking towards something that exists in the spaces between sound. The silence isn't waiting anymore. It is spreading. The gaps between events are shrinking. Nome was 47 minutes. The last one in Missouri was 12. Tomorrow, they flying me to a facility with other listeners. They claim it is for research, to help us understand our connection to these events. But I know better. We were the breadcrumbs leading back to silence, and they regathering us in one place. 11:13 p.m. is coming again. I can feel it building already, hours early, pressing against my skull. Tonight feels different. The seed inside me has grown into something else, something ready to bloom. If this is my last entry, know that the Nome silence wasn't an isolated event. It was a test, and we failed by surviving, by carrying pieces of it back into the world. The clock on my laptop reads 11:12 p.m. The keys are getting harder to hear. 11:13. The silence is here, and this time, I think I'll run. And that's the last echo for tonight. The wilderness closes back over our footprints, but the stories linger, like breath in frozen air. Make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on, so you'll know when we return to the dark. In the comments, tell us where you're listening from or share a strange story of your own. Midnight Whispers is more than a voice. It's a gathering place. Until next time, stay wary of the woods and what waits beyond the light.